recent years, more and more people are choosing to either completely abstain from alcohol or limit their intakes on a regular basis. And there might be some merit behind that, which I'm going to be discussing today, as to whether alcohol is something that could potentially be affecting your progress in the gym, and if you did choose to not drink, what could the potential consequences be in terms of improving your performance, overall health, and body composition. The first stage of alcohol metabolism occurs in the stomach, where it's converted by an enzyme called alcohol dehydrogenase into acetaldehyde. So this step is important because the intermediate product, acetaldehyde, is actually both toxic and carcinogenic, which means that high exposure of this over time could potentially increase your risk of cancer and also lead to high amounts of toxin exposure, which would damage cells and cause free radical increases and lead to aging and potential increased disease risk. The final stage, or stage 2 of alcohol metabolism, occurs in the liver, and this is where acetaldehyde is converted to acetate, which is a safe product, and then eventually metabolized into acetyl-CoA and then excreted as water and carbon dioxide. So as you can see, the liver takes a huge brunt of being able to convert the toxic product of acetaldehyde into acetate, and that in itself uses a lot of energy because alcohol cannot be stored in the body or tissues. So any alcohol we ingest, we need to process it independently, which can potentially mean that your ability to absorb nutrients from other food sources is diminished because of the fact that alcohol requires a lot of energy and the liver is processing a huge amount of toxins if you are exposing yourself to a lot of alcohol. So in order for alcohol to be actually metabolized into less harmful products, we need a cofactor called NAD. And NAD is responsible for a number of functions within the mitochondria and within synthesizing energy from glucose. So if we have less NAD available because we're using it to metabolize alcohol and convert it into less harmful products, the disruption in this ratio and balance causes heavier amounts of stress within the liver because it's exposed to more toxins if we're consuming high amounts of alcohol. And eventually, less NAD will disrupt processes such as glycolysis, converting glucose into energy which we can use. It also affects gluconeogenesis, which is synthesizing glucose from protein, and also lead to things such as DNA damage and mutations due to the depleted NAD within our bodies. So yes, alcohol does have a huge role in overall health and how we're able to both process nutrients and look after ourselves. Is there any way that alcohol can be less harmful to the body if you are choosing to drink less frequently and in smaller quantities? So we do know that in a fed state, so after a meal, and regardless of the composition of that meal, whether it's protein, carbohydrates, fats, or mixed, it doesn't make a difference. That increases mitochondrial activity and ADH availability within the stomach. So if there's more alcohol dehydrogenase in the stomach, we can then metabolize it faster or convert it and essentially process it faster because we want to limit the amount of toxin exposure we have. Obviously, lots of people do drink without a meal because they think that they're going to get drunk faster, but ultimately you're causing more damage in the short term if you choose to do so. So always try to have alcohol with a meal so that you're able to process it faster and expose yourself to less toxins in that space of time. We know the consequences of alcohol on your health and DNA, but in terms of exercise, what does this lead us to in terms of physical performance? As I mentioned earlier, alcohol disrupts glycolysis and gluconeogenesis, and glycogen is the predominant fuel source both our brain and muscle cells use to generate force, function properly and efficiently. So if we have a lack of it or there's a shortage of it, our brain is going to prioritize it and our muscles are not going to potentially perform as well. So we know this with heavy alcohol consumption, it both affects glycogen synthesis, gluconeogenesis, and fatty acid oxidation, so the breakdown of fats for energy. If all of these are impaired, we're going to potentially feel worse, therefore physical performance is going to be affected over time. It does tend to typically feel a lot harder, you're a lot sweatier, your heart rate is up, and physically you don't perform as well as you would have if you weren't drinking. So a lot of it, both anecdotally and from what the science suggests, is that alcohol will potentially make you feel worse. You're going to have inhibited processes occurring in the body, and as a result, performance is going to drop. In regards to muscle growth and hypertrophy, we understand that alcohol actually has a role in mTOR regulation. So mTOR is a protein that is responsible for protein synthesis, and it's typically the marker that we use to determine whether someone is in an anabolic state, being able to build mass, increase cell growth, and improve muscle function and cellular function. It is often found that it's downregulated up to 8 hours post-alcohol consumption. So if mTOR activity is downregulated or suppressed by alcohol, this means your ability to build mass and recover better and feel good is going to be disrupted. We also see that ligases such as E3 or other proteins are also upregulated, which promotes catabolism, breaking down of muscle tissue. So alcohol is less favorable on improving body composition as it downregulates your ability to synthesize more lean mass. It also upregulates the proteins responsible for breaking down muscle tissue. So in terms of composition, that could suggest that there would be a higher accumulation of fat and a decrease in lean mass overall.
In regards to strength output, we have seen that in one study that looked at alcohol consumption and force output, which is the metric we use to determine how strong someone is, they found that even 36 hours post-consumption they saw reductions, which suggests that even if you consumed alcohol on a Friday night, you would still be feeling symptoms of that all the way up until Sunday morning. So that's a huge window of time for you to be performing suboptimally. Imagine if you're drinking every 3 days, that input is going to be sustained as long as you keep doing it. So when it comes to physical performance, we know that alcohol is not your best friend, particularly if your goal is strength. And as we know with muscle hypertrophy, both being affected means that alcohol and physical performance do not particularly align well. We know that there is a direct correlation between frequent heavy alcohol consumption and fat accumulation, particularly around the abdominal region. What is less evident, however, is that within light and moderate drinking, up to 2 a day is not seen with any particular trends. But that's very hard to determine because I think the number of studies that have looked at this haven't been able to look at longitudinal effects. So that's over the course of 10 years and compare that to non-drinkers. So again, the evidence is very limited within that area because I think when you have people who are being tracked, they're not likely to be able to adhere to it over the course of 5 to 20 years if you're looking at a long-term effect. But we do know that heavy drinking, which is 14 drinks or more per week, does directly correlate, and I think that's also partly to do with the fact that alcohol is highly calorific with 7 calories per gram of alcohol you consume. So if you're having a number of beers each week, 1 pint of beer is equivalent of approximately 220 calories. So again, if you're having 14 beers a week, that's a huge amount of calories that you're having to bank in addition to food. And if you're less active as well, then all of them together don't particularly gel too well when it comes to achieving an ideal composition. Another interesting factor is that alcohol consumption has also been related to changes in appetite. While short-term studies haven't necessarily found any difference in alcohol consumption and the amount of food people consume, they've done it instantaneously as opposed to looking at the alcohol effects once it enters the bloodstream and has started to be metabolized. And studies that have seen that saw that there were changes in hormones called leptin and serotonin. So serotonin is increased temporarily when you consume alcohol, and leptin is downregulated, which means that your ability to feel satiated from food decreases, which is typically why when people drink alcohol, they tend to consume more calories when they do drink heavily, because you are feeling better from drinking, the food is giving you more serotonin from eating, and you're less satiated, which means you're going to want to consume more. So as you can imagine, over time, if you're frequently drinking, you're going to be potentially eating more than you would on an average day. And ultimately, if your goal is towards weight loss and body recomposition, being in a calorie surplus means that your weight is not going to change. And if anything, it's going to increase if you're not exercising on a regular basis. And my final point on recovery is that HRV is also affected, which is heart rate variability. And that measures the distance or the intervals between each heartbeat, and this score that we get from our data trackers determines how well we're able to cope with and manage both physiological and psychological stresses. And we all know that accumulations of stress can lead to increases in cancer susceptibility and overall health over time, because sleep quality is affected, as well as your ability to just function well if you're constantly in a high arousal state. Alcohol has been shown to decrease your HRV, which again leads to being able to cope with less stresses, particularly exercise, which is a stressor on the body. So if you are drinking heavily, your ability to tolerate stress is going to be impaired, your ability to recover between bouts of exercise, as well as even being able to just perform and manage a workout is going to be much harder than it would if you're not drinking. So just bearing this in mind, that alcohol not only affects you on a physiological level, but your ability to manage and regulate stress will have a huge systemic impact on your overall health. So where does this leave us when it comes to alcohol consumption and being able to physically perform and function better? Well, I think it's fair to say that heavy amounts of alcohol will be detrimental to your health under every perspective possible. It's shown in the literature. It's a well-established fact that it's going to reduce your ability to perform well. You're going to have decreases in HRV, which means your ability to tolerate stress is worse, high fat accumulation and changes in body composition, all of these which do not lead to a healthful lifestyle. Less consistencies are found with light to moderate drinking, and even in one study they found that people who consumed a glass of red wine each night actually had some improvements in health markers, which could potentially be down to the fact that red wine does actually contain certain nutrients called polyphenols and resveratrol, which are full of antioxidants and things that can promote longevity and anti-aging. But the interesting part with this is that these nutrients can actually be found in other foods, such as dark leafy greens, fruits and vegetables, and dark chocolate. So you don't necessarily need alcohol to get these benefits. I can imagine people with less variation in their diet, less consumption of fruit and vegetables, if they're having that red wine, it's potentially going to be more beneficial than people who are just eating a standard American diet, which is lacking of vegetables, fiber, and any other nutrient that can promote a more optimized health profile. So yes, in short, I would recommend, if you are looking to improve your health, try and reduce alcohol to occasional usage and potentially just abstaining altogether if you can. But again, if you have the occasional drink, make sure that you eat while you have your drink. And again, there's a huge social factor to alcohol, so if you do enjoy it, then just be smart about it and try not to make any silly decisions and overconsume on a regular basis. Thank you for watching. If you have any comments or thoughts on this, please let me know and I will get back to you as soon as I can.